customers in Madison, New Jersey. And ever since, we've gone on to work with a number of different municipalities in this capacity. So that's sort of how I got here. And this is my first CCL event, so it's nice to meet all of you. And I look forward to, I've had some great conversations and look forward to coming back to some of these events in the future.
So the first question that I would raise, and it's kind of a broad question, is in the small and big picture, what does electrification and decarbonization mean to you?
This is going to be one of the most daunting tasks that we've undergone since the New Deal. I mean, what it means to me is that our whole company spent the last decade trying to take 80% efficient heating systems and make them 96, 97, 98% efficient. Now we can take a heating system and make it 3, 4, 500% efficient. That is a sea change in what we've been accustomed to. I've had to retrain my staff. We've been undergoing some very intensive training that we have to break our old bad habits that we've only picked up over a decade and reframe the conversations that we're having with homeowners in an entirely different way. So this is one of the most profound moments in our country as far as climate goes. It's going to require all hands on deck. It's going to require the training of an entirely new workforce. And it's going to require the training of homeowners and individuals out there who are now empowered with some of the most generous incentives that have ever been available, including some disenfranchised communities, low to moderate income. Soon there's going to be programs available that will pay for almost entirely the transition over to heat pumps. Middle income folks will pay for up to half of that. High income folks will get 30% of these systems paid for. And that's just one small component of this bill. There's other components effective today. Everybody in this room has has a $1,200 tax credit available to them to make energy efficiency improvements to their home. This renews every year, but it expires every year. So if you don't use it, you lose it. So now it's important to get out there and think about putting together a plan over the next decade that, okay, maybe we'll replace our windows, we'll replace our doors, we're going to strategically think about home improvements in a way that we've never thought about them before. So, and to deliver that is a whole other conversation. So that's outside of my pay grade. So I'll pass that on to Richard. Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Well, our companies, like I mentioned, we have companies from all different sectors. Scott's a great example of a company. Ciel Power is a great example of a company who's walking the talk, helping to create a more clean energy economy. But we're trying to transition to a more sustainable economy overall. And to do that, we know that our energy system has to be transitioned from a fossil fuel-based energy system and decarbonized to a low-carbon energy system. So what that means is we need to really shift both demand and supply. We need to lower demand for fossil fuels and liquid and gaseous fuels and increase demand for electronics, electrification. And so that means a huge change to our whole system. And one thing that's been helpful to me is listening to Jesse Jenkins, who's a professor at Princeton, who's actively involved in all of this with the IRA. And what it makes sense to me is that, it's a complex system. What has to happen is, it's almost like the analogy is having a healthier, balanced diet. And so for our energy system, there are three major components. One is we need to have fuel-saving components like sun and wind. So these are renewables. Like in New Jersey, we're looking to get over 11,500 megawatts of offshore wind developed by 2035, I believe the target is. So we want to shift the mix away from fossil fuels to clean energy. So one is fuel-saving, renewables from sun and wind. The good thing is it's free. Once you have the infrastructure built, the fuel is free. The sun and the wind are free, which is great. The bad thing is they're intermittent. So the second area we need is fast first balancing resources. And these are energy resources that provide flexibility when needed, like battery, storage, and smart devices. And then the third component we need in the whole system are firm resources, as long as they're clean. Today we get those from natural gas and nuclear. But tomorrow we need to move to advanced nuclear, small modular, geothermal, carbon capture, and clean hydrogen. So what the IRA does is it shifts the financial incentives to stimulate demand for clean energy and reduce demand for fossil fuels that are emitting carbon. And also at the same time, it stimulates through tax incentives, as Scott mentioned, tax incentives, grants, direct pay, to incentivize manufacturers, businesses, and consumers to start, producing, clean energy and shifting investment from fossil fuel-based energy sources to clean energy sources. So to me, this is part of a larger, complex system and a systemic change that the IRA and the other two bills I mentioned from the government are actually intervening to shift financial incentives to help change behavior. And it's happening already. I mean, I've got a long list, even since the IRA passed. Scott mentioned a lot of it, but there are other areas too where a lot of people are, manufacturers are building plants all over the country. We can talk more about that a little bit later too.
So one of the things that I think about with the IRA and with electrification in homes is both the good news and bad news is it's voluntary. And so the question that comes up for me is how do we convey the urgency to deploy and implement the IRA at a large scale? And the corollary of that is how do we create this sense of urgency and opportunity to every household in the country that this is something that's available to them? The Democrats, unfortunately, are very bad at publicizing their accomplishments. How do we get the word out to everybody that, oh, this is something I really want to do?
So the clock just started ticking, and that's something that's profound because these incentives expire each year in many cases. So there's a heat pump credit, for example, that's available right now today. You can replace your hot water heater with a heat pump hot water heater. How many people in this room have even heard of a heat pump hot water heater before? All right, so we're educated. You were right here. This room is a very educated place. Most of these conversations that I have with folks, they've never heard of a heat pump hot water heater. What is that? How does it work? Wait a minute. I just put in an on-demand heater, and I thought I was doing a great thing there. Now we're talking about electrification and decarbonization, and talking about technologies that nobody's ever heard of before. So we're gonna need to train an entirely new workforce. If you want your child to be a millionaire, have them grow up to be an electrician in the next 10 years. There's going to be a very, very, very strong demand for electricians in the near future. So that is, in almost every house we go into needs the electrical modifications to move into this electrified future and decarbonized future. So heat pumps are one example, and this is a credit that exists today for $2,000 is available to everybody in this room that owns a home to put a heat pump in. That could be a heat pump hot water heater, could be a heat pump heating system, essentially to electrify. It could be a heat pump air conditioning system, which many of you already have. So it's an interesting time. How do we convey this? How do we take something that even industry people hardly spoke about 6 months ago, and now because of this legislation is not only is it going to be the de facto standard because of the amount of incentives that are available to it, but how do we train the workforce to install it? How do we train the homeowners to request it? Because I'm in a stodgy industry. The folks in my industry don't want to change. They don't want to know about a heat pump. They've been putting in traditional tank hot water heaters for their entire life. They don't want to switch and they don't want to learn new technology. So this is going to be one of the most daunting challenges. How do we train the workforce that knows about these products to install these products? And how do we train homeowners to request these products? It's all going to be part of this conversation, and the clock is ticking. This is a 10-year plan, so there's a lot of work to be done. We are setting up apprenticeships. We're working with the utility companies here in New Jersey to onboard them from apprenticeships that they set up. So there's a mad scramble to do retraining underway and to bring folks into this orbit, because I'm in a cottage industry, and now my cottage industry just got thrust into the limelight, and there's enormous credits for weatherizing, there's enormous credits for this transition, and it's an incredibly exciting time, but it's going to require grassroots mobilization at every level. So I've talked to ANJEC, which is New Jersey's Association of Environmental Commissions, about speaking to their folks and training the environmental commissions in the 465 municipalities that we have here. So each of those at a grassroots level, we're talking about the volunteer green groups that are in these communities. We're talking about getting the word, library presentations, street fairs. We're talking about getting the word out on every level, all the way up through mainstream media and into the national realm. So there's a lot of work to do in this area.
And I'll pick up on that. Another aspect of it is with the electric vehicles. So I have an EV. We were part of advocating for the EV law that was passed in New Jersey in 2020. And that law did three things. It helped lower the barrier in terms of cost, because one of the barriers was just electric vehicles are more expensive than internal combustion vehicles. So the law gave a $5,000 rebate on right in the hood to help lower that barrier. The second thing it did was it helped alleviate range anxiety. People are worried about running out of electrons when they're driving. So it invested in increasing the number of public charging stations throughout the state. New Jersey is in great shape because we're the most densely populated state in the country between Philadelphia and New York. So there are plenty of places to put electric chargers. The third thing it did focused on investing in EVs and public buses and school buses in urban areas and environmental justice communities. So that's just an example of how it can stimulate demand and also supply. I was lucky I got my EV a month after the governor signed the bill. I got my $5,000 rebate. I've had it 3 years now. It's a 2019 Kia Niro EV. One thing I like about it is it looks like a regular car. If you look at it, it doesn't look like, no offense, Scott drives a Tesla, but my car looks like the same internal combustion engine car. So it might not have the same, some people might, depending on their political leanings, they might not want to have a car that's obviously an EV. So I think this helps adoption rate across all of the entire cultural and political spectrum. So that's another example. So one thing about EVs, one thing that's critical about this is there's a lot of concern about the impact on the grid, the electrical grid. So one thing that's really critical is that as we are stimulating demand for electricity, shifting cars from internal combustion engines, from carbon fuel to electricity, we're also upgrading the grid at the same time, because if we don't expand the grid, and the estimate is we have to expand the transmission grid by 2% every year until 2050, I believe it is, which means we have to more than double the size of the grid by 2050. They have to happen in tandem. I think we can talk more about barriers down the road, but that's one critical piece of that. All these things are interconnected.
Actually, the information that we've learned in CCL is we need to be increasing it, I think, at 2.5%, which is 2.5 times what we're getting now, and it brings up the whole issue of permitting reform. That is another whole issue. The IRA was a Democrats' reconciliation bill. The Republicans didn't much like getting it done, but this is something that will benefit the red states.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up on that because one thing I didn't really address your question last time was I'm kind of an evangelist for EVs. So I talk to all my people, all my friends, and extended family members that cut across a different political spectrum, and basically I just tell them it's great technology. The thing is, it doesn't matter what political party you're in. This is just better technology. This is the best car I've ever had. I love this car. I had it for 3 years. I have 26,000 miles on it. The only thing I've had to do, they're turning my attention. Oh, okay. The only thing I've had to do is rotate the tires. There's no oil to change. The maintenance cost is nothing. I have a level 2 charger in my garage. My fuel cost is 1/3 of what it would be if it was a gas vehicle. So that's how I sell it to my friends across the whole political spectrum is this is just a great drive and it's cheaper to operate. And as we hit economies of scale, these cars will be at parity or even cheaper to buy off the lot from internal combustion engines. So anyway, your question about how to get people excited about this, we have to remove those cost barriers that Scott's talked about, that once the clean energy choice is also a smart economic choice, then we have a huge opportunity to shift, to really turn the table on this. But the red states, blue states.
So I'm going to ask at least one more question at this point, and then open it out to the audience. And what are the barriers and constraints that we're facing? I mean, we are an organization that helps get legislation passed. What are the barriers and constraints that we're facing in making climate legislation achieve its goals? You do have.
I've got a list here.
I figured, so I was gonna Richard jump on this one.
I'll just go through my list real fast, and we can kind of expand on some of those. But some of the choke points, basically, expanding the clean electricity demand and supply and equilibrium. I just touched on that a little bit. Doubling the rate, more than doubling the rate of grid expansion. Electricity demand will more than double by 2050. Interconnection is huge. You know, I mentioned that in New Jersey we're developing offshore wind, so we have to plug that into the grid. So interconnection is a huge potential choke point. There are over 8,100 energy projects, mostly wind, solar, and batteries, that are waiting for permission to connect to electric grids. We're part of a regional transmission operator, PJM, for our electric grid, and PJM recently put a hold on all future permits because they're just overloaded. They're like 2 to 4 years backlog, something like that. So that's a huge problem for us, and that's a big challenge. PJM put a freeze on all new applications until 2026. It now takes an average of 4 years for developers to get approval for new projects. And they currently have 2,700 energy projects under study. The other thing is cost of the grid. We're going to have to expand the grid. Who pays for that? And that's something that is handled between states. And that's going to be a lot of haggling about who's going to pay for that expansion cost. Permitting reform, we mentioned before. Permitting reform is huge at the state level. The administrative capacity to handle all these different permits and grants and tax incentives, that means the state, both at the state level and federal level, has to have the administrative capacity in the agencies to be able to handle all those requests and paperwork. That's huge. I'm almost finished. Workforce needs you touched on a little bit. We touched a little bit on negative partisanship and cultural and political tribalism. One example of that is Medicaid. You know, with Obamacare, when it expanded, made Medicaid money available to the states. A lot of states just wouldn't take it. Even though it's the right thing to do for their public and for their citizens, they didn't do it because of the tribal affiliation, the political tribalism. That's my opinion. So the incentives are really powerful. But I heard a quote recently I thought was pretty good, actually. It said, money talks, but politics scream. And that's the problem. I mean, this IRA is doing everything it can to make a smart economic choice, but the political partisanship is so strong. That's a huge barrier. And then, you know, this is going to be uneven, even as we're going to have some successes and failures. And another example is, I think a lot of times the people that are opposed to these types of programs, they like to highlight the failures, like Solyndra. Who here has known about Solyndra? What happened to Solyndra? So that's often touted as a failure of why government should not be involved in these sorts of things, because Solyndra went bankrupt. What they don't talk about is that Tesla also received federal loan guarantees. Tesla almost went bankrupt. We wouldn't have the electric EV charging, industry without Tesla. And the overall program made a profit. We don't hear that part of it. So, and the other last thing I'll say is just what we deal with from our organization is incumbent business interests and the sunk costs. So the fossil fuel industry, those industries that are benefiting from perpetuating an industry, an energy system that's based on fossil fuels, they don't have stranded assets. They have sunk costs. So it's much more difficult for them to adapt and start investing in renewables. So they see renewables as a competitive threat. So they're doing everything they can to put up barriers to those new competitors, because about 78% of our energy system is still from fossil fuels. They'd like to maintain that monopoly power. So as a result, they use a lot of those the money to influence policy and also to fund grassroots organizations that are trying to stop these projects. So that's pretty all listed. There are a lot of challenges.
At this point, we can start taking questions from the audience.
Thank you, Scott and Richard, for coming and presenting. So I could use microphone. You talked about the IRA, the incentives, heat pumps, for example, upgrading homeowners, upgrading. And in New Jersey especially, there's people who don't own but they rent apartment buildings. Do they get incentives, the landlords, to upgrade?
Renters are eligible for the tax credits that are available through the Inflation Reduction Act for energy efficiency improvements. They're obviously they may not be upgrading the heating or air conditioning systems, but they are eligible for a suite of those incentives in addition to homeowners.
I don't fully understand. How does a renter get if they didn't put in the heat pump? Well, why does the landlord have an incentive to put in the heat pump if they don't get anything? There's no incentive.
The renter can purchase a heat pump air conditioning system, and this falls off of my expertise level, but they are eligible for those incentives. Its suite of products that are underneath that incentive is very broad and vast. So it may not be that they're purchasing a heat pump heating system for the entire home, but they may be purchasing a heat pump or a heat pump air conditioning system that keeps their individual apartment cool or warm, and that unit should qualify for these types of incentives. So, and this goes for I'm not an IRS official or an accountant even for that matter. Everybody wants to check with their advisor, but those types of purchases would be available to renters as well.
But all those landlords have no incentive. The new construction have no incentive to put in heat pumps.
Is your question, do landlords have incentives to transition to heat pumps? Yes, landlords have that incentive available to them as well. So even individual, if you own a two-family unit, you can transition to that as well.
20 unit, etc. They have incentives to upgrade it.
So the Inflation Reduction Act it also has incentives available for new constructions as well. So if you're building a home for home builders, they have a different suite of incentives that are available to them. This bill is about 800 pages. I'm only an expert in a very small number of those pages. So and the new construction is not something that my company is directly involved with. So I can't really delve that deep into that particular part of it.
Thank you.
Question, in reaching out to homeowners, to what extent have you had to grapple with the emotional aspect? You know, I've had a gas furnace my whole life. My parents had always kept the house warm. A heat pump isn't going to work as well. Or my mother and my grandmother, they always used a gas stove. Can't imagine using an electric one. And how do you deal with that?
It's something that we deal with every day. And everybody has their feelings about their home. Everybody has their opinions about how they prefer to cook their food, how they prefer to heat their house. Even in this room, I guarantee you there's probably 100 different opinions on the best way that could be the most energy efficient that everybody should adopt. So it is something it is a challenge. It is something that we deal with every day. Every one of those conversations is a little bit different. One of the biggest points that we have to discuss with a homeowner is that these new systems aren't making heat. We're not breaking that molecule apart and sending the carbon up the chimney and using the hydrogen. That process is not happening with these units. They're just moving heat. These units the technology in the heat pump has evolved so much through advances in refrigerant and advances in the cycling of these units. They don't have to turn off and turn on. They can cycle now continuously in many cases. So they're able to find heat on even some of the coldest days like today that they can extract from the outdoors and bring into the indoors. And that process is so much more efficient because it's just a matter of cycling refrigerant around in a closed loop and then reversing that loop for the summer months. So explaining the technology and how these units work and what makes them different and what makes them so much more efficient. People get very scared when they hear about a new technology, and rightfully so. You want to be able to be comfortable in your home on the coldest day. It's not like air conditioning where, we'll just take off our sweatshirt and, it's not the end of the world if my house can't reach whatever it is, 69 degrees on a warm day. But it is a much greater challenge if it can't get warm in the wintertime. So explaining a lot of the demystifying this conversation has probably been the most effective way that we're able to do this.
But also after a certain point, after a certain number of people, do implement these, have your neighbors. I mean, basically, the more people you know personally that have heat pumps and have made the change, and they love it, and they can talk about it just like I talk about my EV. I let people drive my EV. The more people you know that are making these changes, saying it's great. I think that's a big part of it too. So we kind of a critical mass of adoption. I think that will help.
So I think this is a pretty similar question to the last one. You're talking a lot about the improved efficiency of heat pumps and everything, and I was out there's a great booklet on all the different electrification options, and I was reading that this morning, looking at the heat pump, talking about how much more efficient it is, and I can't help but think about, as a personal example, my brother just moved into a new house. It's a new construction in a new neighborhood, and all of the houses are still using gas, right? And it just seemed, as I was checking it out, it seemed like such a wasted opportunity. Why are these houses not using the new electrification options? And, of course, not everybody necessarily cares about like the carbon emissions but if it's, if it's more efficient technology, cheaper potentially, if the economics make sense, you would think that people would just, and then of course there are the tax incentives, right? You would think that people would naturally switch over. So do you think the reasons that these changes aren't happening is purely like an emotional or education issue, or do you think there are other things that might be at play?
There's a lot of factors at play right now. The heat pumps weren't even in the conversation 6 months ago. Even for my company, which was delivering energy efficiency improvements, we do a lot of building shell work, we insulate, we air seal, we put in on-demand tankless units. Those were the de facto conversations that were happening 6 months ago. That's what makes the IRA so profound, is that it just put not only the thumb, I would argue your entire elbow on the scale, and moved something that was, even in my industry, there were conversations about, it's too cold here to use heat pumps. It's, these things can't keep up. It's just, imagine having heating your house with a heat pump on a day like this. But the fact is that these technologies have evolved, and it's the IRA literally just took its hand and said, that's going to be the wave of the future. So now that's pushing those conversations into the forefront and forcing everyone in my industry to we're all looking at each other going, everybody's going to want heat pumps now. We better get to work. And including in my company, where we've had a series of bi-weekly training sessions to educate our entire staff on this particular technology, because there's about a dozen different ways that you can potentially install a heating or a hot water system in a home. So it's the passage of this bill that's really pushed this, and everybody's really scrambling to try to get hip to this, if you will,
This also ties into the IRA being a federal program. There's only so much we can do. I mean, there's a lot of upside potential, unbelievable, but the states also play a key role, especially when it comes to the use of public utilities. So your question, in New Jersey, we have Board of Public Utilities, and they're the ones that actually regulate the utility companies that are privately owned. And that they have a lot to say in terms of, what you're talking about, what is it, natural gas is more efficient. So Governor Murphy, our governor, a week and a half ago made 6 large announcements tied to the Energy Master Plan. One was taking a look at using RGGI money, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and targeting, I think, $7 million toward shifting both commercial buildings and residences from gas to electric. So here again, using the power of the state incentives to make that shift to help move the market in that direction. The other big announcement, he's having the BPU take a look at the gas utilities, natural gas utilities, their business models. Because we have a lot of perverse incentives. We have a lot of incentives built in that actually incentivize them to perpetuate a system we're trying to break free of. So one thing, there'll be a lot of public stakeholder meetings that we'll be participating in to see how do we kind of re-engineer away the business models of utilities to incentivize them as well to move more towards clean energy. So I hope that addresses that as well.
I'll just dovetail real quick off of that, just as well. There's 4 different, if you're here in New Jersey, you already have the availability of something called the Home Performance with Energy Star program, which is a very generous incentive program that provides everybody here up to $5,000 in cash back and up to $15,000 in zero interest financing to make energy efficiency improvements. And 47 different states have a variant of that program. Now you have the new tax credits that are now available to everybody, $1,200 for energy efficiency improvements and $2,000 for heat pumps. From there you go into the electrification program, which is a part of the IRA, which makes funds available to states to start their own electrification program. And that program covers a portion of your heat pump, it covers a portion of your upgrading, your wiring in your home, it covers a portion of a whole bunch of different things. And then you have a building performance program that was available now through the IRA, which is a fourth program. So even here in the state, the utility companies are scrambling, the administrators of these existing programs are scrambling to sit down at a conference table and figure out how are we going to add these different variations of a program that we already have and make them available to the general public and promote awareness of these programs and incorporate all of the facets like the income requirements. Should we have our contractors asking families of how much money they make to qualify them for these programs? How are we going to potentially incorporate all of the individual requirements of each of these programs into an offering that we can communicate clearly to our ratepayers? These are very complicated programs, and there's 4 of them, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't talked about the EV programs or the commercial programs or any of that stuff. This is just what's available to homeowners, so it's really a complicated conversation that everybody's trying to figure out. How do we decode this so that people can be aware of it and act on it, and understand which one is better for my family? You know, there's so many nuances to all of these, and that will play out, unfortunately, over the next few years. But again, the clock is ticking. This money is not going to be there forever. It's there for 10 years. And we have that limited window of time. 10 years is a very small amount of time. I've been in business for more than 10 years, and I can tell you, it's hard to shift it that quickly. You're talking about, you know, an engine that was idling that just got dropped into gear and the foot is fully on the accelerator. But it's one of the most beneficial and opportune things that could have ever happened for the climate. I never thought I would be alive to see the day, quite frankly, where a bill like this would be passed. So I'm incredibly grateful and incredibly excited, but it is a daunting task.
Well said.
So my question involves some things that you've touched on, the electric grid primarily. New Jersey is still building gas-powered power plants that are very polluting. And when I try to talk to other people about this, my friends, people at church, people wherever, they say, yes, but we need that electricity because we're all going to be moving to EVs and other electric things, because the solar and wind isn't going to be ready in time. Do you have any comments on that? I mean, we're facing this like open gap between when we can have renewable energy enough and when we can get rid of the gas-powered pollution.
My comment on that would be the benefit of the gas-fired power plant is that you can turn it off and you can turn it on. You know, that is how I put my head on my pillow at night. So the fact that it gets built, it doesn't necessarily need to run, but it can be the supplemental source of energy that we need when the wind is not blowing and the clouds are not providing solar power. So that is how I rationalize it in my own mind. I don't know, I'll let Richard pick up maybe on this topic, but coal-fired power plants are a much different beast. They need a lot of time to get warmed up. They need a lot of time to shut that. But natural gas can almost come on demand.
That points to, I mean, we're part of the regional grid. You know, we're the largest regional grid, PJM. So we're not a closed system. New Jersey doesn't supply its own energy. We can contribute to the larger grid and pull from the larger grid. So the more we can work at the state level, and this is where we as citizens who really get involved, is to make sure that we can help address the transmission growth and the interconnection problems. Here again, we have a backlog of clean energy projects that want to get plugged into the grid. They're being held up. Once we take care of that bottleneck, we won't have to worry about, you know, adding more fossil fuel projects. So I think we just need to look at let's make it easier for clean energy projects to get built faster and get plugged into the grid. Once we do that, it'll take away the demand for natural gas plants.
Hi, we live in New Jersey, and we really appreciate your honest assessment of how difficult it is to get the installers switched over to heat pumps. We had heat pumps put in, and it was really challenging, even with good searching skills and intelligence. And I know that in New York, for instance, there's NYSERDA, which helps guide people through that process, I believe. And I was wondering if there's any plans to do that. I would think that that would help you, Scott, because you would be a preferred provider, I'm sure. And is there any plan to do that in Jersey?
There's multiple concurrent plans that are being rolled out. The utilities individually, like for example, I'm very fortunate. PSE&G is our primary provider in the service territory that we do most of our business. We're in northern New Jersey, so they're one of the most progressive utilities out there today, and they're really embracing this clean energy future and really putting their money where their mouth is with an apprenticeship program. They're willing to help us in recruiting and retention, et cetera. There's a lot of things that they're doing to help us as a small business with that process. There's a lot of things that they're doing internally. There's other things that the Department of Environmental Protection are doing. There's other things that other industry groups are doing as well. And like home performance with Energy Star, a lot of people don't appreciate what a trade it is. And even outside of the heat pump conversation, how do you insulate a house? Insulation is a trade, just like a plumber or an electrician is a trade. You know, a lot of people don't appreciate that. When you're drilling a hole every 16 inches in the side of somebody's house in the top and bottom, how much damage you can potentially do to that home. So having skilled installers at every point in this process is very important. And it's, like I said before, it's a cottage industry. We're here to talk about jobs and training. Like all of that will need to be gas needs to be poured on that fire, and I believe that it is, and I look forward to that work, the development of that workforce, and this becoming more mainstream.
One thing, I think everybody, if you look at your energy bills, you'll see there's different charges. In New Jersey, there's something called a social benefits charge, just added to your bill. And what that is it goes into a fund, it's called the Clean Energy Fund in New Jersey. And that Clean Energy Fund is dedicated funding. It's supposed to be dedicated funding toward funding programs like energy efficiency improvements for both commercial, low to moderate income families, residents, things like that, to help lower that economic bar to go to clean energy. Unfortunately, ever since the Corzine administration, that Clean Energy Fund has been raided every budget. The funds have been diverted out of it to plug holes in other parts of the budget. And a lot of people are not aware of that. And that's one thing I think, again, just the citizens that are concerned about this, where do we get involved in policy? Governor Murphy is getting his budget address on February 28th. We had businesses, Scott's business as well, we had a business letter that went to the governor saying, fully fund the Clean Energy Fund as you promised when we elected you, because these funds are critical in the larger transition to a clean energy economy. And when you divert the funds, you continue to divert the funds as your predecessors did, you continue to erode the trust in government, which is also another barrier, and you also hamper our progress to clean energy. So one thing I'd like to encourage you to do, for what we do, we get businesses to add our business voice to make sure that we talk to policymakers to hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable for that. So that's one thing you could do, those of you who are in New Jersey, urge the governor and legislature to fully fund the Clean Energy Fund in the next budget and don't divert funds.
And there also is, just as a final note on that topic, a lot of job training and transition programs included in the Inflation Reduction Act that will help people move into this industry. It's not an unknown that there's a very small workforce here. So there's a lot of funding in that Inflation Reduction Act for this purpose as well.
I think that's all the time we have for questions. Just want to really give a warm applause for Peter